Welcome to the wood turning workshop. My buddy Lightning here. We're in Oologah, Oklahoma on the Dog Iron Ranch, home of America's favorite son, Will Rogers. And it's also home of one of America's most historic and important trees, Osage Orange. And that's what we'll be using to make our project today, a weed pot. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can tell you're excited. Stay tuned. For those of you not familiar with Will Rogers, he was an actor, writer, humorist, cowboy, and legend. He was born and raised in this scenic part of Oklahoma. His childhood home is now a museum, and it's visited by people from all over the United States and the world. Also, you'll see many animals walking around because they've kept this as a working ranch. This land where Will once roamed is very rich in history, and part of that history is the Osage Orange tree. Now, it goes by many names: hedge apple, mock orange, a French name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but people around here call that bodark. Before the pioneers got here, you'd only find Osage Orange along the Red River Valley in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas. But now you can find it in almost every state in the continental United States. One of the things the Native Americans liked about the trees was you could make tomahawk handles, war clubs, even rope from the tree. And they made a tea from the roots that they could wash out sore eyes with. But one of the most interesting things about the tree is the density of the wood and how flexible it is. They could make bows from this that were incredible. Tribes as far away as 2,000 miles wanted these bows and traded for them. Once the pioneers got here, barbed wire hadn't been invented yet. So they needed a way to fence in their animals, and Osage Orange was the perfect answer for that. They took the tree and planted it about 18 inches apart and made a living fence row. And it had to be horse high, bull strong, and hog tight. And it worked beautifully for that. One of the reasons, there are 1-inch thorns over this entire plant, and it made it virtually impenetrable for any animal to go in or out. It became so popular that the seedlings and plants were sent all over the United States. And at one point they estimated that there were 250,000 miles of living hedgerow of Osage Orange across the country. It helped tame early America. Having trouble finding an Osage Orange tree? Well, look down, not up, and you're going to find the unmistakable fruit of the tree, the hedge apple. Now, this is the forbidden fruit your mama told you never to eat. Now, squirrels like the seeds, and you can put it around the house as an ornament, but that's about all you can do with this thing. However, the tree's wood still has lots of good uses today, one of which is fence posts, and that's what we're going to use to make our project. Let's get turning. Will Rogers is famous for having said, "I never met a man I didn't like." Now, I don't think there are too many turners who'd be able to say the same thing about Osage Orange. All the characteristics that make this such a great wood for the uses we talked about are also the reasons that this is such a difficult wood to turn. The biggest being that the wood is so dense, you oftentimes feel like you spend more time sharpening your tools than turning. Now, one of the things I wanted to do when I made this project, this wood has a lot of character and I wanted to save it. So when I turned it, I made sure that I didn't turn away all of the surface of the wood. The characteristics are beautiful. You can tell that this post has been through several fires. It's been out in the elements for decades, and that tells a story. So if you turn all that away, you just wind up with a plain vase. By saving it, you wind up with something that has a lot of character and beauty. Now, with any wood that you harvest yourself, make sure that you check for any metal objects inside. This being an old fence post, it could have nails or barbed wire that you can't even see. Now, I know there's nothing in here because I scanned it with a metal detector earlier, so now I know it's safe to take to the bandsaw and cut to length. Anytime you place a round piece of wood on the bandsaw, you should shim it so it won't roll. We have a good flat spot on this piece, so I don't have to worry about that. And since it's tough wood, just feed it in slowly. Take a look at this wood. Now you can see why they call it Osage Orange. It's a really cool color. It does get darker as time goes by, but it's still very unique. Now I want to make a matching set of weed pots, so we're going to make a template. I've got a piece of cardboard, and I have a profile gauge. And since this is such a large curve, I can't do the whole shape in one shot, so I'll do one half at a time. Press that down, get the profile, lay it down here in line with the piece so I've got it right, and take a pen, we'll mark that half down, reset the template gauge, press this down on the second half, swing it down, keep it in line with my piece, move that out of the way, and finish drawing the profile. Well, now it's time to mount this on the lathe, but before we do that we have to consider a couple of things. We want to preserve some of the character of the wood. Well, to preserve it, we can't turn it away. So we're going to mount this off center. And that's kind of handy because we actually have no center. I want to take a small 4-prong drive center to hold this, because if I used a larger one, I wouldn't get any bite in the wood and it might come free. So we get that set in, and we're going to take it, slide this into the headstock, and bring our tailstock up and angle this just a bit. We don't want it off a lot, because if it's off too much, we'll be way out around and it'll vibrate the lathe. Now you can see this is way out around, so that's too far. Well, I had to do a little bit of work off camera because this 4-prong drive center wasn't cutting it. It kept the piece so far out around it was dangerous. What I did find out though was a larger 4-prong drive center actually fit inside that hole in the wood. It still kept it slightly off center, but it holds it much nicer and it's safer to turn. And that's the neat thing about turning wood. Every piece is different, so you have challenges you have to figure out every time on how to make it work for you. Now we're going to start roughing this out, and I just want to take off a little bit of wood on each end because we want to stop and check and see what we're removing with our cuts. Remember, approach with the handle down and the bevel up. Raise the handle. When it starts to cut, move to the side. Since this is out around, you're cutting some air right now. And also, since the grain is running parallel with the lathe, we want to cut from high to low. I just want to keep nibbling away at the wood here and work my way back towards the center. Because as much as I love the character of the wood, I don't want the entire piece to be bark. I want to have some of that nice orange wood showing through. And really, all I'm making right now is a cylinder. We're going to make the shape of the weed pot with the spindle gouge in a minute. And that's about as far as I want to go. I've got some nice wood showing there. And we got some of that good orange wood showing right there. So now we're going to start working on this end and get it roughed out a little bit. And that's about as far as I want to go with the roughing gouge. It's a nice tool, but you can't make the extreme curves that we need to make to finish the weed pot, so we're going to use a spindle gouge for that. And I've got a lot of extra wood on either end, and our weed pot will lay out about like that. This part I'll wind up making into a tenon. This will be the top of it, and I'll cut that off a little bit later. But right now we're going to start working on this end and start building the curve, just like one long gentle bead. Like I always say, you sneak up on a bead. You don't take it all off in one cut. Just like with the roughing gouge, nice light cuts. And you're still cutting air here, so you got to be careful. Now if you start taking too deep of a cut, you can back off and come in with a lighter cut. There's absolutely nothing wrong with adjusting your cut in the middle of the cut. Once your tool starts skipping off the wood, or the wood starts peeling up like this, that is a good sign that your edge is dull and you're not turning well. Also, if it feels like you're pushing, you need to go sharpen. And my cut is obviously suffering from all those problems, so it's time to go to the grinder. And believe me, it won't be the only time we make a trip to the grinder today. My spindle gouge has a swept back grind, so I'm using this system to help me keep the angle consistent. It's kind of like sanding. You want to make gentle contact with the wheel and keep the tool moving. Because in sanding, if you stop in one spot, you build up heat. Same thing with the tool. And also, by keeping it moving, I don't grind a flat spot into the bevel. There we go. Now we can get back to turning. Much nicer. Occasionally take your template and see how your shape is coming out. We got a ways to go. And that's one thing with Osage Orange, you got to have patience. It takes a while to get to where you want to wind up. Okay, let's get our template, see how things are looking. Okay, I've got the bottom half of the weed pod shaped the way I want it, but I do want to make one more pass because I want to leave as smooth a surface as possible, because Osage Orange is very difficult to sand, and the cleaner the surface I can leave now, the less trouble I'll have sanding. But of course that means one more trip to the grinder. One thing to keep in mind when you're making this grind, you don't want to spend too much time near the tip or you'll make it too pointed. You want this as rounded as possible. If you make it too pointed, it becomes very aggressive and very hard to control the tool. And you don't wind up with a very good cut either. Now I want to show you how we're going to make our finishing cut on the bottom. It's something you normally do with a bowl gouge, not a spindle gouge. But since we have a swept back grind, it will work the same way. We're going to come up and approach the wood, have the tool down like this. We're not going to rub the bevel, and we're going to contact the edge of the tool and slowly move our way across like this. It leaves a beautiful, fine finish. And once I establish the tool touching here, I'm actually going to be looking on the outer rim of the weed pot and watch my profile as I cut. That's the best way to get the shape I want. So let's give it a shot. And one other thing we have in our favor, this is in round a little bit better. So I can pick up the speed, and the speed will really help the cut out. We're going to take a blade and make contact about here, but we're going to roll the tool over and just let the edge touch, and just whispers of wood will come off while we do this. You're just going to use your fingers as a guide. Not a lot of pressure. Make one more pass. Pick up the speed of my pass a little bit. And that leaves you with a really nice surface. Now we want to go ahead and shape the tenon to fit in our chuck jaws. And we're going to use a Badan tool for that. And I've ground this at an angle to match the bevel on the inside of my jaws. That way I get a nice fit. Move the tool rest. We want it to be a little bit higher than center and parallel with the bed of the lathe, because we're going to present the Badan tool in a scraping manner and it'll be less aggressive. Gently make contact with the wood. We're going to take a little bit at a time. Since this is such hard wood, if you push really hard, it'll catch. And we want to make sure that we angle in just a hair, so we cut under this rim a little bit. Because it'll make good contact with our jaws on our chuck bit. That looks good. Now obviously we have too much wood on the end here to go into our chuck, but we'll take care of that in a minute. I don't want to affect the stability of the piece by reducing this down yet. So we're going to go back to our spindle gouge and start shaping the top of the weed pot. Now a couple things to keep in mind as you're making this shape. It's a smooth flowing shape, so you yourself have to be smooth flowing, and you shift your weight from your right to your left foot. Raise the handle as you start making the curve. Now if you come off the cut, that's okay, you can start over. But this is how you make a nice smooth shape. The other thing is I'm not looking at the tool tip. I know where it is. I'm looking at the edge of the piece and watching the shape I'm creating on the silhouette out here. Okay, let's see how we're doing. Oh, we are right on. All we have to do now is turn the lip to the weed pot, and that's just a simple bead. I'm going to switch, though, to a smaller spindle gouge to make that cut. Start rolling my body to shape the bead. We're not even close to it yet. As always, we sneak up on it. Now I'm going to start shaping the underside of the bead, because that's critical to the look. I'm just rolling my tool to make the cut. And you can see that nice little sharp transition. That's why I went to a smaller spindle gouge. That's good. Now, we'll shape the bead on the top a little bit more. So this is still a little bit too large. Now I'm not worried about removing the wood on the top yet. I'll take care of that when we reverse it, because the way we're holding this piece right now, it'd be too dangerous to remove that much wood. Well, now it's time for your favorite pastime and mine, sanding. Obviously, with Osage Orange, we can't hand sand. We're going to have to power sand. But one thing we want to be very careful about, we don't want to sand away any of the character we worked so hard on saving. So you're not going to hear me say this too often, but I want you to speed the lathe up. By speeding the lathe up and using a light touch, the drill will be less likely to push in and sand away all that bark. So let's give it a shot, and everything should work out okay. The sanding's done, and I just got back from the bandsaw where I cut off the excess wood on the tenon. I was going to put a hole in the center, but we don't need that because Nature already provided us with one. So I'm going to just take this and mount it in the chuck, and we're going to clean up the end. I'm going to use a bowl gouge to make the cuts because I'm going across the grain, and a bowl gouge cuts in grain very nicely. You could do this with a spindle gouge, but it'd be a little bit more of a risky cut. And I want to take very light cuts because I'm cutting a little bit of air for right now. Don't roll the tool too far this way, it'll be too aggressive. This way, you shut it down a bit, and it's a tamer cut. And you can hear the chirping, and that's because the wood is splintered and fractured here, which is another reason to take very light cuts. Now, if you're rubbing your bevel properly on this cut, you'll actually feel the tool heat up a little bit from the friction with the wood. Now, if it gets really hot, you're pushing too hard. But a little bit of heat's not a bad thing. This is such dense wood, that's going to happen. Well, the last bit of turning we have to do is to finish up the bottom. But how do you grab this thing? You can't. So I've turned a jam fit chuck to where the rim fits perfectly inside, nice and tight. And I've changed out my live center for a live center with a cup chuck end without a point. So I'm getting a lot of surface area covered by that chuck, so when it spins it's going to hold it nice and tight. Okay, put our tool rest in position. I've got a little bit below center. I'll lock it in there, make sure nothing hits. And we're going to take light cuts again and just slightly dish it out so this will sit nicely on a flat surface. You don't want to get any closer than that because you could take away the structure of the wood and this could come loose, and that wouldn't be a good thing. Now, to get rid of the nub, I'm just going to use a rotary tool to knock down the wood, and I'll be ready for the next step. Now for the fun part. Watch this wood pop out. That polyurethane is great. Draws out all those oranges. Look how it's drawing out the burn marks too. Now this is going to be the first of 2 coats of hand-rubbed polyurethane. And the one thing I want to do to make this finish even more special is after this dries, I'm going to buff it with steel wool. Then I'm going to apply a second coat. And once that coat's dried, I'm going to buff it again. Now while we wait for this coat to dry, I'm going to show you one more step that will really pop out the finish. This has 2 coats of hand-rubbed polyurethane on it, and I've sanded with steel wool between the coats. I've got a buffing pad on my lathe. We're going to charge it with carnauba wax. Let's bring the speed up a little bit more. We need the heat because it melts the wax into the buffing pad. Now we bring this up and we're going to buff on a protective coat of carnauba wax, and it's going to put a nice soft luster on the wood. It's going to be really beautiful. Now I'm applying a bit of pressure too to help build up a little bit more heat. And carnauba is a great wax to put on because it provides a very durable finish to the wood. One thing to keep in mind, if you're going to sign your work, sign it before you do the wax. And the wax will seal the signature in. There. That's looking really, really nice. There we go. Now we have two beautiful matching weed pots. Now this orange will slowly turn to this brown over time. If you want to protect it, just keep it out of the sunlight. And the polyurethane I used on this also has UV protectors, so it will slow the darkening of the wood. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's project and learning a little bit about the history of Osage Orange. So until the next time on the Wood Turning Workshop, keep turning. Say, did you ever hear the one about the burro, the chicken, and the donkey? No? Oh, this is a good one. You're going to love it. Okay, see, the burro came in one day, and he was talking to the chicken.